The man who has led that energetic movement, who has gotten so many states now to sign on to a constitutional convention, is joining us right now. You know him well. He is Mark Meckler. Mark, great to have you on the show.
Hey, it's always great to be with you, John, and love to be with your listeners as well.
Well, you're doing such great work, such important work. And one of the fun things I like about the Convention of the States movement now is you have your own poll with the Trafalgar Group, and it is measuring some of the most important issues and issues that the rest of the polling industry have been ignoring. And one of them struck me the other day. You had a pretty stark finding about how Americans of all political stripes view the raid on Mar-a-Lago, view the raid on Donald Trump's office and home. What'd you find?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing we found, I think, was the overall finding, which is 73% of Americans believe that was a raid by Democrats on their political enemies. And they're seeing, I think, the government for what it is, the administrative state for what it is, which is it is part of the Democrat establishment, and it is intended to rein in their opposition. And that would include folks like you and me, conservatives.
It's pretty amazing to see, because really the belief that this was an enemies list sort of thing really went across political stripes. It wasn't just Republicans thinking that way. Clearly, Republicans thought it more. There are a lot of nuances to what you're finding in the poll right now. You really have, I think, one of the most interesting snapshots of American thinking we've seen in a long time. And what's interesting about it is it comes 19, 20 months after Joe Biden said that he was going to make big government work better. Right? He basically said, you're fearful. I got the solution. Big government, we're going to fix everything for you. You're going to be so happy. 20 months in, 80% of people think we're going in the wrong direction. But what are some of the things you're beginning to see as the undercurrents of the American public that are probably going to drive the next couple of elections decision making?
Yeah, I mean, part of it we polled about election enthusiasm post the Mar-a-Lago raid. And what we found is that the vast majority of Republicans are more enthused to vote. The vast majority of independents are more enthused to vote, and not so much for Democrats. There's almost a 30-point spread in post-Mar-a-Lago voting enthusiasm between Democrats and Republicans, about 20 points between Democrats and independents. And to me, that, again, is just leaning towards the red wave. Here's the number that I found the most interesting, though, and the most nuanced. We're seeing this in all our polling. Among Hispanics, that number was the highest. It was over 80% of Hispanics.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah. And I think the reason is I've been doing a lot of Hispanic media lately. I was just at CPAC. There was a lot of Hispanic media there. There's a connection among the Hispanic communities, and there's a diverse group of Hispanic communities in this country, but there's a connection, familial connection and historic connection to a lot of places where they deal with what we would refer to as banana republics or tin pot dictators. And so they've seen this show before, and they've seen the raids of political enemies, the imprisonment of political enemies, and they came to the United States to avoid that kind of stuff. And so they're more worried than most groups, and they're more to the right of almost everybody in America right now.
Their inspiration to come here was to flee that, and this was like the shining beacon they yearned for. Now they come here and they realize, it's starting to look like the place I fled. That dynamic is probably very potent. Do you think Democrats understand they have this vulnerability right now?
I think they understand it. I would say sort of the consulting class probably understands it. The problem is the party has been captured by the far left, the radical progressive left, and there's not much they can do about it. When you look at it electorally, usually I can think of a way out for whoever the player is. You and I have been in this long enough that you can kind of game it out. And when I try to game it out on the left, the problem is all of their enthusiasm in their base is on the radical left. And so they have to appeal to the radical left, but that's causing them to lose Hispanics and blacks as well. I mean, they're really in trouble among minorities right now.
Yeah, and that's been such a key part of the constituency for a long time. It's really the solid block they've been able to count on for a very long time. Independents move back and forth, but the minority population has been pretty solidly Democrat. I think we saw when San Francisco first threw out their school board members in a recall, the liberal city in America, then they threw out the prosecutor. That was probably a warning sign that a big part of their base has said, enough's enough. We're rebelling for the first time. I saw another poll that was really interesting to me, and I think it goes to another issue that I think you've been so cogent on. Republicans had a big chance to fix things every time they were put in. They didn't fix it. Democrats come in. They don't fix it. The youngest generation, the majority of more young Gen Z and millennial voters identify as independent than combined identify as Republican and Democrats. This idea that people are starting to reject both parties as sort of the uniparty. They're both the same, and more are declaring independent, particularly in younger people. There is a danger if Republicans get back in control and they do the rope-a-dope again and they don't get immigration done, they don't shrink government, right? This is one of those elections that if you don't deliver, you might be a minority party for a while. Do you agree with that from what you see in the polling?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, people have high expectations, and my expectations are pretty low of the Republican Party because if you look at the current leadership, they have a long track record, and their track record says they're not going to do anything. I'll give you a very specific example. What you've got is Republican leadership like Kevin McCarthy, who, likely right now to be the next Speaker of the House, and he's saying to the director of the FBI, clear your calendar and preserve your records because we're going to have hearings. My perspective on hearings, John, is, I've been actively engaged in politics for 12 years. I've seen a lot of hearings. I've seen zero results. And if we expect hearings to lead to something, I would say shame on us because they've been fooling us for decades and they never do anything.
That's a really great point. We had the church hearings. We had the 9/11 hearings. We've had so many important, we had a lot of the Russiagate hearings, but the same mentality still seems to be significantly embedded in the administrative state of these law enforcement intelligence agencies. I was struck in the last 24 hours, and I was just talking to Joe Ken about this yesterday. You see what the former CIA director, the former NSA director, the man who gave us the NSA program, gave us some of the intelligence towards the middle and end of the initial wave of the Iraq War. Michael Hayden saying that he considers the current Republican Party more dangerous than the extremists of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. When you hear a guy like that and you think, well, he was in charge of our whole intelligence operation, this is where his colors are coming out now. What do you think the Americans want to see that shrunk? Is it time? I mean, where do you stand on the IRS, the FBI, and the CIA? What would you do to solve the problems that concern so many conservatives today?
Yeah, I would take away the power from those agencies. In a lot of those cases, I would disband those agencies. I would take that power, and to the extent you can give it back to the states where it belonged, I would do that. If we need federal and law enforcement agencies, which we do, to be fair, for some interstate crimes, interstate drug trafficking and sex trafficking and things like that, then those agencies should be much more limited. On the FBI, very specifically right now, my position is simply end the FBI. We have endthefbi.com, literally tens of thousands of people right now writing to their congressmen, their state delegations, demanding pressure to end the FBI. And the reason is, John, the FBI has been corrupt since its inception. People who say, oh, the FBI contains a bunch of great people, I'm sure that there are some ethical individuals in the FBI. My question is, why aren't any of them resigning? Why are we not hearing public statements from hundreds of FBI agents saying, hey, the Bureau's become politicized. We don't want to be part of this. We don't agree with that. I mean, we've literally seen precisely zero agents come forward and say that.
Yeah, we might have the first couple now with Grassley and Jim Jordan, but it's it's 14 out of 30 or 40,000 agents. And
John, let me push back a little bit on
please.
that. Even our behind the scenes whistleblowers.
Yeah, right.
The question is, where are the men and women of conscience? And I'm not even just talking about agents. How about secretaries and janitors and HR people who just say, look, the agency's become corrupt. It's not trusted by the American people, and I'm not comfortable working here anymore. Even people who don't know anything, who aren't.
We haven't seen any of them. That's right. Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. If you eliminate the FBI, there's obviously certain transnational crime and terrorism responsibilities. Do you do something like what the Brits have, which is you've got, Scotland Yards for crime, and then you've got your domestic and foreign intelligence agencies? Do you do something like that? How would you address some of the things like terrorism and some of the transnational and trans-state or cross-state crime stuff?
I'm going to give you kind of a blunt and humorous answer. I mean it genuinely, which is that ain't my problem. And I'm a citizen, I'm a voter, I'm an activist. This is why we elect members of Congress, to solve problems like this. I absolutely acknowledge that there are legitimate functions that need to be conducted by the DOJ and the FBI and various law enforcement departments. it's up to Congress to figure out how to parse those out in a way we can actually get rid of the corrupt agencies.
Your point is, no matter what they do, get rid of the corruption and the deep state mentality that seems to pervade this. There was an amazing moment for someone like you that I know values small government. When the CDC director came out a couple of days ago, really it's been a 2-week process of slow reversal, but basically said, we got everything wrong. Everything wrong. We're really sorry. We're going to reorganize the chairs on the top of the Titanic deck. We paid this agency along with NIH, billions of dollars for 20, 30 years. I remember George W. Bush in the beginning of his presidency talking about pandemic. Obama, pandemic. Tens of billions of dollars, and they didn't get anything right about what they were paid to get right. What happens to public health agencies? What should happen to public health agencies that blew the COVID pandemic so badly?
I mean, I would say at the very least, everybody at the top 5 layers has to go. And again, we didn't have anybody inside those agencies, nobody who was blowing the whistle, who was screaming and yelling, saying this is all politicized. I would also say that there's probably billions of dollars of recompense owed to all the people who lost their jobs, who lost their businesses because of all the quote unquote mistakes by the CDC. And the bottom line is, they claimed, and they still claim, by the way, that they were following the science. They weren't. They were following the politics. And so I think this is what the federal government would have to do to make it right, is to literally pay out hundreds of billions, maybe it's trillions. I don't know. They seem to print the money like it's nothing, but to all the small businesses that lost their businesses, to all the people who lost their jobs and their careers, they got to do something to make that right, and they never will.
Yeah, no, it's a bridge too far for them to take the full accountability. And yet we know that these weren't just paper errors, right? These are errors that created lethal situations, set a generation of education students behind in ways that we may not fully appreciate for a decade or more. This had human consequences.
And I would add one thing that's really fundamental to this. I was sitting with Senator Ron Johnson several months ago in Washington, D.C., and I asked him, you're running, you're coming back. Why are you doing that? Because I know, Ron's a business guy, and I think he finds DC frustrating. He's a successful CEO. And he said, because I know what the federal government did to kill hundreds of thousands of our citizens during this pandemic, I have to come back and expose that. And I look at what they're doing today. These shots are really bad for kids, and the evidence is coming out. There was a big study out of the UK that got released today. It's putting kids at risk. It's causing more kids to die from COVID, and the CDC is still recommending this stuff.
I think even more shocking to me as I watch this play out, for the first time we have really considered, and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, First Amendment is very clear. Congress shall not pass a law that will abridge the free expression that we all enjoy as an inalienable right here in America. You saw federal agencies working with news sites and social media sites to silence dissenting voices, even though it turned out the dissenting voices many times were factually right at the end. It's proven that they've been right. The idea that the government could feel so unencumbered to conspire with a private party to try to silence a journalist, a doctor, an everyday citizen, clearly a school teachers. How did that mentality, how do we go from the shall not abridge mentality, which is our founding fathers, to, hey, we'll conspire with Twitter next week to shut down so-and-so because we don't like him, Alex Berenson, New York Times reporter? I
would say because, look, left-wing ideology always ends in totalitarianism. I mean, there's literally never been an exception in human history. Jonah Goldberg many years ago wrote a great book called Liberal Fascism. I still highly recommend it. I disagree with a lot of stuff Jonah says now, but it's a great book. And this is liberalism, no matter what. This is a truism, always continues its leftward slide until it becomes totalitarianism. And in this case, totalitarianism means you can't disagree with the state position. And so they know they have the First Amendment to deal with, so the federal government works through these private companies that are aligned with them politically anyway and silences speech. And I got to tell you, there's an organization I got to point out, not my own, America First Legal, Stephen Miller, doing incredible work on this.
We just had John Zajosny on. He's doing a lot of the great work there. It's really doing epic legal work, isn't it?
I mean, in my opinion, the most bold legal work, and full disclosure, my son just graduated from George Mason Law School and he's working there. So there's my bias for a young, but I just think they're doing extraordinary work and they're calling this stuff out, and they're the ones that got a hold of the emails that proved this stuff ultimately. What I'm hoping we see is a new sort of cutting edge First Amendment litigation holding the government responsible for utilizing private entities to suppress free speech.
It's almost numbing to think about that way. And if we don't have a legal front right now, we don't have any defense, because the political defenses aren't working, right? The Republicans have been unable to have any traction. It's really been the courts have been the only place where some of the core principles of freedom have been preserved over the last few years. I want to ask about an agency that, as you got into politics, you were so instrumental in the founding of the Tea Party movement, the IRS, Lois Lerner. We went through that whole episode, and a decade later, they want to hire 87,000 agents, put $80 billion more a year in it. It's clear that middle class and working class are going to be the primary target of that new infrastructure. What is middle America's response going to be to this new law that is wrongly called the Inflation Reduction Act? Not even close.
I'm sorry for laughing, but I mean, they now admit,
they
the day
do.
after it passes, they admit it has nothing to do with inflation.
Yep.
And this is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen, because to me, that's a campaign gift to Republicans, because I just don't think it plays well with anybody anywhere. The idea of, hey, we're going to hire 87,000 more IRS agents. There's nobody in America except for IRS agents that like the IRS. It is the most feared agency in the United States of America. When you see that envelope arrive in your mailbox and it has IRS on it, nobody's generally happy to see that. And so I don't think this plays well for Democrats. And I think if Republicans are wise, they're going to use the heck out of it, and it's going to help them win this red wave.
Everyone I've talked to said this could be one of the biggest issues that is not being measured right now by traditional politicians. The Mar-a-Lago raid will get the Republican base together, but I think the IRS one goes far, far deeper into independents. And quite frankly, I think even centrist or slightly center-left Americans, it seems to have an elasticity that we haven't seen in a very long time. Maybe the Obamacare fight, which gave rise to a lot of what the Tea Party did, but This is a really potent issue, isn't it?
It really is a potent issue. And, you were mentioning earlier, we do all this polling, and we try to get out in front of everybody else. And I actually just authorized, we have a poll in the field right now about this issue of hiring 87,000 IRS agents. And my expectation from being on the phone with and in communication with grassroots all over the country is people are really unhappy about it, and that it is not going to play well for Democrats come November.
Now, the Convention of the States has achieved an extraordinary amount of the success. You're about, 2/3 of the way there, right?
Yeah, we just passed the 19th state, so that's 19 out of 34 required states, so we're well on our way. And I would say right now, the biggest measure of our success is in the last, say, 3 weeks, John, we've been just radically and repeatedly attacked by the liberal media. There was a hit piece by Business Insider. That was followed a couple of weeks later by a hit piece by Associated Press. They didn't like that we're engaged in state-level elections, raising money, fighting this fight all over the country. It was on MSNBC. I saw it on PBS yesterday. So the left is uniting against the idea of Convention of States because they don't like the idea of taking power away from D.C. and giving it back to the people.
Yeah. By the way, this was a founding fathers idea. Rejecting this is rejecting actually one of the ideas that the founding fathers gave us as a remedy. Beyond the 19 that have already ratified this, there's about another 10 or 20 states that are currently considering resolutions, right? So you've got a lot of things going on around this country right now to get that final, what do you need, 15 more, right?
Yep. Yeah, we're very close. And here's the best way to measure it, in my opinion, is mostly this is going to be Republican-led states. There are currently 31 states with both houses controlled by Republicans. There are two split states. One is Minnesota. I think we're going to flip Minnesota here in this cycle in November.
Sure.
And so that'll be number 32 out of 34 states. I actually think there's some people aren't talking about this much. I think Maine is in play. I think we could see both houses in Maine flip.
Wow.
You have a gubernatorial candidate, Paul LePage, who has been governor before. He's definitely a right-wing guy, and he's looking good.
Yeah, and he's got a little bit of that Trump sort of bravado. He calls things like he sees them. You don't have to sugarcoat anything when it comes to him.
Yep, he's a controversial guy, but the fact that he got the nomination again and his numbers look good. And then I would say in 23, what you're looking at is Virginia. They have a one-seat margin, the Democrats in the Senate. We flipped the House of Delegates in this last cycle. By the way, the last race in the House of Delegates to be called was a recount, and it was won by the Republicans by 115 votes. That was a district captain for Convention of States, her first time running for political office.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah, there were 150 volunteers in her district. They made over 1,200 calls to low propensity voters, and she won by 115 votes.
Amazing.
So we're going to continue to play there in Virginia. I expect to see Virginia flip, and that would bring us to the necessary 34 states to call the convention.
Pretty remarkable. It really is. And what's interesting about it is it clearly has a defined purpose, right? The purpose is to get ratification in states, but it really has created a larger conversation in America that we've drifted away from what our founding fathers and, quite frankly, most of the generations before us embraced and enjoyed and revered about America. The last couple of generations seem to have drifted so far away, Republican and Democrat alike, from so many of our ideals. Do you feel like this has brought a much larger movement? It isn't just about getting the convention. It's about reinventing America to the way it was, sort of a back to the future strategy. It seems like a lot more issues than just the convention are now caught in this enthusiasm.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. And this is a restoration of the constitutional system of governance that the founders intended. And if you look at what's going on in Convention of States, we participated in over 250 elections in one way or another back in 2020. We'll do over 450 in this cycle. We're in school board elections, state legislative elections. So these folks are involved all over the country at every level. They're involved in legislation in all of their states. There are literally hundreds of Convention of States meetings all over the country that have taken place this year. So the movement is growing every single day, and I expect that it's going to have a tremendous impact on politics in America.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. You can feel it. I mean, you're, what, 5 million, 6 million strong now?
About 5.3 million right now.
Wow, it's just amazing to think in less than a decade, not only all the states that have ratified, but the fact that so many people are now involved and engaged in communicating, getting your polling, getting your messaging. It is probably one of the largest grassroots movement I've seen in my 30-year career as a journalist. Your prediction for the fall. So right now, I think the conventional wisdom in Washington, which is worth what you pay for it, which is nothing. House goes Republican, Senate stays Democrat. What's your gut tell you? I mean, you were closer to the real grassroots warriors in the states. What do you think happens in this election?
Yeah, I think the House goes Republican, and I think with what's going on post Mar-a-Lago raid with this 87,000 IRS agents, there's a chance that we could pick up some of the Senate seats that I think have been put at risk for Republicans because of bad choices in the primaries. But I think they could get swept across the line by the wave that's coming. So I'd give us a 50-50 chance on the Senate and a pretty solid, sure shot on the House. You
mentioned Minnesota as perhaps the next state. That's really interesting. I've heard a lot of interesting people focusing on Minnesota. Nevada seems vulnerable in the Senate, Arizona. And then the other day, some pollsters told me, said, keep an eye on the Colorado Senate race. Michael Bennet is not a sure thing. Are those states where you're seeing some maybe below the radar shifts in sentiment?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. In fact, we're working pretty hard there ourselves in Colorado, especially. We're making a significant commitment there. Our grassroots are involved. I expect that we're going to see one of the houses, I think it's the Senate in the Colorado legislature, flip. And that's going to flip to Republican is my belief. I think they have a very good shot to do that. In Minnesota, we only need 4 seats to flip the legislature there. So that pickup is going to happen. I think there are probably somewhere between 9 and 13 seats in play. So one of the things that I pay attention to that most national observers don't is what's going on in the state legislatures. Since the days of the Tea Party, I'd have to look up the most recent number, but I know we're over 1,300 seats gained to Republicans since the Tea Party days. So the states are moving in the right direction, except for those that are very blue. The rest of the states are all moving in the right direction. And that's where political change comes from in America.
It does. Yeah. It's the best barometer of where our country is going. The state legislative races always tell us. I mean, so the great political reporters of the past, they knew, keep your thermometer in that temperature pool, because that's where you're going to see the change. And you clearly affected a lot of that. Mark, it's always a pleasure to have you on. What's the best way for people to stay in touch with all the great work you're doing at the Convention of States?
Go to conventionofstates.com, sign the petition. If you're interested in what we're doing, click the Take Action tab and get involved. Because it's not just you and me, John. It's up to our listeners to help save the country.
Yeah, and you've got a cool pocket guide, too. It's right up there with the Constitution pocket guide. I love it. It's a good, fun thing to download for people who don't maybe know what the convention's all about. So bravo for that as well. Mark, we're going to get you on soon again because there's a lot of politics to play out over the next 3 months. It's going to be fun. Thank you so much for your time.
God bless you, my friend. Thanks for having me.
I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks are willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.